Welcome to Discover Energy Work. I'm very excited today. I've got a guest which I wasn't expecting to have so quickly, and I'm really thrilled. I have Rolf Kramer, who is the developer of Mindwalking, and this is something you might not be familiar with. He's written 2 books on it, and it is absolutely amazing. Although we might not describe it traditionally as energy work, when I started reading those books, I can say I felt I could learn a lot from talking to Rolf. So welcome, Rolf. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, Richard.
So can you give a little background to you? I know you're a psychologist with a master's degree in psychology and a lot of experience. And
when I studied psychology, that's in the mid-70s, there was a lot of conditioning therapy going on conditioning theory going on at the time. So in other words, it was stimulus response and chasing rats through mazes to see what they do about getting the cheese when they get electroshocked on the way. And then we had personality inventories and intelligence tests and that sort of thing. And that was not what I came to find out about. And at the same time, there was this influx from the East, yoga, meditation, all sorts of strange books in terrible photocopies. And that is what I guzzled down with great enthusiasm. So basically, I studied 2 things at a time. And when I finished, I saw I couldn't practice psychology in the way it was done at the time. So I went to find my own way, which involved doing a number of years hitchhiking around the planet, which involved studying with all sorts of people, doing all sorts of seminars. And what really helped me is the Western scientific call it mental set, because the logics of science are very helpful when it comes to investigating things. And so I ran into phenomena through meditation and LSD, which made me think. And then I said, well, all right, if this is possible, it should be possible all the time, and not only when I meditate or when I take LSD. And that started my research, basically. And I sat down with people and just basically played around with recall. And sooner or later, it turned out that by applying standard psychology techniques, you could break the barrier to past lives and to telepathic phenomena, and got in contact with other planets and non-physical beings and whatnot. So it was very exciting to find all that out, and it became formalized, and sooner or later somebody called it Mindwalking. It wasn't actually me called it Mindwalking, it was in Australia. I did a seminar tour, and they said, what do you call your stuff? And I said, well, it's called personal analysis and coaching. And they said, nobody in Australia can pronounce that. So we had a bit of a brainstorm, and after the brainstorm, we came up with Mindwalking.
Right. I mean, it sounds fascinating. Can I take you back sort of, LSD, I mean, that's already, quite amazing. There was a time when that was something which was legal. Obviously, Stanislavkov and I've forgotten who else worked with LSD, but I mean, this was something which was potentially a wonder drug. Did you have like experiences with your LSD that you could say, like, there's telepathy going on and past lives? Is that something that was woken up for you?
Not at all. LSD, I took a number of trips under rather controlled conditions, because I found that I get very sensitive to all sorts of influences like noises and stuff like that. So I picked my environment, and most of these trips were very peaceful. In other words, no bad trips. And what I found is my perception to be extremely heightened, talking about energy work, to feel the energy between people going back and forth, to watch horses on a field and see how they interacted, although they were hundreds of meters away, and you felt the pulses going on between the horses. And that sort of perception was fascinating. And so it's more in the realm of telepathy. And you look at plants and you see how shall I say, the intention to grow, whether that sort of stuff. That was what really got at me on LSD. And I thought, why can't I see that without the drug? And that's what got me studying.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I can see that making you interested in, or you know, my experience of energy work as well with the Taoist, with a Taoist teacher, and also, you know, what I was thinking is immediately nowadays it seems that, you know, with mindfulness, that it's almost like talk about cultural appropriation. The whole of the Western world is talking about mindfulness, and it's like, yeah, we've got this new thing, it's called mindfulness, and we can look and we could say, well, looks like meditation to me, without like take it some words and ideologies and idols and symbols taken away. It's quite similar, don't you think? Or do you think that differently?
I think mindfulness is just a very thin cliche of the real thing, because mindfulness entails participation and not just looking in a sort of disengaged way. I'm talking about that. I'm saying this on my Mindwalking experience, on that background. When you are dealing with other people in a session, and they get into the hard parts of a traumatic incident, you have to be mindful, which means you have to pay attention to anything they say, to any reaction they have, and you have to be empathic at the same time. In other words, you have to get the facts and you have to get the feeling, and you have to live with it. And that is quite demanding. And when you are in a telepathic connection with some angelic or demonic being out there in the spiritual world, which happens when you do your mind walking solo. Solo means you do it by yourself without a session guide. Mm-hmm. When you do these solo sessions and get into these contexts, you do have to be mindful 1000%, because you have your reads on your galvanic skin response meter, which is your feedback. You have what you get from the other side, and you have to be with him and love him for whatever bastard he may be. And that sort of mindfulness I wasn't taught, or I haven't seen being taught in psychology.
Right. Okay. Well, that, I mean, yes, that is true. With and it brings me to, like, you've unpacked a load of boxes all at once, which I love. You know, angels, self. You know, there's a certain amount of working with yourself, self-work, which is you know, enormously powerful, and you know, quite challenging. And then there's the whole to work with anybody to develop that level of empathy and compassion. That's a lot of work in itself. So there's that. Right. And then I'm curious about your journey. At what point did you you know, suddenly realize, is there a story around how you realized that you stumbled on something? So is it like you were talking with somebody and you asked certain questions, or was the galvanic skin response meter that you're using, called the Mindwalker, you know, at what point that came in? I mean, it's just fascinating to try and understand the genesis for you, where you feel like you've gone, oh, I'm onto something which is something which I can call new and unique.
You have a Mindwalker right there. You showed it to me before, to show it to people so they understand what that is. Yeah, it's got electrodes. In this case, it's one-hand electrodes with an isolator and insulator in between, and it's got a needle which wriggles about, and that gives you feedback. Um, to answer your question, no, there was no such enlightening moment. It was a gradual approach. You see, the age group I belong to, there was very, how shall I say, post-war factual, and things like past lives you wouldn't even mention. And the top end of the scale was horoscopes in your radio, in your radio magazine once a week.
Right.
So the whole idea of cracking a traumatic incident by regularly studying it was not taught anywhere. So basically, I found out that I have to start on another end by asking people to describe what they see. I found that this is a relief. So just listening and getting them to describe is a relief, which is in a way Rogerian therapy. A client-centered therapy, but then you have to keep people on a line, because in client-centered therapy, they wander off easily. So you take a subject, and the subject, for example, is I'm afraid I can't fly in airplanes because I can't sit in trains because I always have the feeling I can't get out. So I can't get out is some pattern which the person has and follows and doesn't like to have it and follow it. So where does this come from? So you ask the person to describe moments when he couldn't get out, and by describing the picture he gets, the memory image, he feels relieved. So I found that you don't have to explain anything, that you don't have to put it in a theoretical framework, that you don't have to interpret it, but you just listen and get the person to stand up to his own memory image, which people are afraid to do. Because the moment when the truck hit your thigh bone and the thigh bone broke, that is the moment you don't want to re-experience. Right. So by getting people to re-experience the very thing that hurt the most, they will, after a while, get through that and feel relief. And applying that principle, I found that people would tell the stories of within their life. And some of these stories were very cruel, being beaten by parents or being locked away or starved or whatever parents do to kids. Mm-hmm. But then after, like this kid got locked up in a dark chamber in the house or in the cellar, and he felt, I can't get out. So you think, well, that's terrible, but that wasn't it. Because he said, okay, now I told this, I don't feel a relief. So you go, okay, now that you've told me all the stories you know, and you can easily recall, is anything on your mind you didn't tell me because it seemed too outrageous? And he says, well, yes, I kept seeing a dungeon for the last few minutes. So you go, okay, what dungeon? And all of a sudden, you are in a dungeon where he died, chained to the wall in 1656. And you don't comment on this. You just listen and get him to describe it, and listen and get him to describe it. And then finally, it blows off and he feels relieved, and that's the end of that. So this is a gradual discovery. Starting with past lives and then seeing that they say, well, I don't know, I feel something's coming in from the left. So what's coming in from the left? Well, I see some sort of gruesome mask face there. So what gruesome mask face? And then you suddenly are in contact with a demonic entity. So the trick I found gradually was let people describe their images in all detail, encourage them to stand up to them, and they will come to their truth. And the moment the truth is found, there's relief. That's the story.
It's fascinating. I tell you why. For me, I find it fascinating because what do we normally do? We and as therapists, people say, no, don't make him think of that. Don't let him go back and experience his trauma. So in a way, what I'm understanding is you're doing the counterintuitive thing. You're saying, yes, I'm going to go, you know, where those shots are coming from? I'm going to run towards them. Yeah. I'm going to run to find out what that is that's shooting. Yeah. As it were, a bit of an extreme metaphor, but it seems to me, certainly, you know, I know from my own experience of therapy, you know, the things which I'm afraid of, I'm really afraid of, like, you know, deathly scared of, and to the point of almost nihilistically, you know, I wanted to rather die than experience it, and so
Right.
it automatically brings, you know, that. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, it's then what wonder that you've said, no, yeah, we need to go in that direction. It's kind of
Yeah.
totally counterintuitive. I imagine you got some kickback about it as well.
Well, not really, because I'm generally ignored by the professional world. But I know that in the professional world, there's a great warning sign saying, don't re-traumatize. But you see, they don't work on the time schedule I have. When you go 45 minutes per week, you don't get very far, and you don't want to make sure to not kick someone in at the deep end. But I'm working from 9 to 6, 2 or 3 days in a row with breaks. Because the client wants that. The session partner wants to find the bone that's buried someplace. And once he's got the scent in his nose, like a hunting dog, he will not let go. So people are keen to re-experience the various stuff they don't want to re-experience. So the main job of a session guide is to encourage them, and in a very big way, be mindful, because you can't force anyone. But when you shy back, you don't help him. So there's a fine line between being, how shall I say, strict and encouraging, and being accommodating. And that takes you to the end result.
It's also, so that brings us to the second point. It's like your sessions are, would you say they're open-ended? It's a phenomenon-led session. It's not we start at 2 and we finish at 2:45. It's you know, it's as long as it goes.
Well, we have found in Mindwalking that to come to an end result, I'll explain that in a moment, or at least to a good in-between result, we need anything between 10 and 15 hours. And that's why we make our appointments for 3 days, whether we take them or not, whether we need them or not. So it may be over after 12 hours, it may take 16, you don't know that. An end result is that the person in question can speak about his cruel death in the dungeon after having been tortured in all sorts of ways, with a smile on his face. So the moment he isn't touched by it anymore, and he can giggle about it, and how stupid could I be to fall into the hands of these bastards? If that's the case, he's through it. And that can be attained within not too many hours.
Right. So 15 hours for most people would already be, you know, I think in like thinking of somebody going in for a block of 15 hours when they could be in therapy for weeks and months. It seems like it makes
Well, in
sense.
the case of
It makes sense, but it's totally different.
Well, in psychoanalysis, you know, it takes years, and it's always symbolic interpretation. Nobody's really asking what you have experienced. So this is very off mainstream, what I'm doing. I'm aware of that.
Right. So, yeah. Well, that's already makes it very interesting. So, when people have come to you, what sort of issues are they normally? I mean, how do they hear about you? I mean, I guess they hear about it from people you've worked with, but I mean, and then what sort of issues do you sort of tend to be working with?
Well, these days, people use the internet and try to find something that might help them. So they put in fear or panic or compulsion or something, and then or in a inner stillness or whatever, and then they try to find seminars or helpers in any way, psychotherapists or whoever, and that's how they find me. And then they see a video, and then they buy a book, and then eventually they call me. People come to Mindwalking, I'm not speaking for myself, but for the people I've trained, with the sort of issue they feel has bugged them all through their life as a sort of keynote that has never changed and has been resistive to change by whatever they have tried previously. And that is expressed. So we do an initial interview to find out, well, what's your problem? And that interview will lead to what we call a negative program. So I can't get out is a negative program. It is something that determines him negatively. He can't resist it. It forces compulsory behavior on him. And he can't change it either, although he knows it. And most of everybody has that sort of thing. Even very powerful people, wealthy people, successful people have one corner where they feel they can't operate the way they want to. And then, of course, the big question, which many people come for, is what sense does this life make? Why am I here? Where on earth did I come from before I was here? Where am I going? Why do I do what I'm doing? Why don't I do what I should be doing, but I don't know what it is that I should be doing? In other words, this whole big thing about the whole point, you might call it, is a major issue in life in Mindwalking sessions.
I mean, when I look at the book, you've written 2 books. They're both called Unbounded, I believe. And that's one that hold it, there you are. There's 2, and it's quite interesting. Unbounded one has this picture of a human head and the world, and Unbounded 2, I think we're on a moon or something.
Well, it's outer space, the spiritual unlimited world.
Right. It's so we're already like going out there. I suppose where I'd like to sort of slowly broach it is when you have people who've come in and they start experiencing or talking about past lives. Yeah, I mean, what happens there? I mean, are they really shocked that they're now experiencing, like, I have a past life, I'm a fervent Christian and I don't believe in past lives or whatever, but I know now I have this deep feeling that this is like a knowing that this is real. Yeah. What happens for them? Do you?
The session partners we usually have are not particularly educated in the, call it, esoteric lore of angels and past lives and whatnot. That's at the time when I wrote these books. That's 20 years ago. People came in sort of quite naively. Nowadays it's different. Everybody knows about past lives and demons and angels because the internet is full of that, and then greys and reptiles and then spaceships and whatnot. But when I started out in the 90s, people weren't aware of that. So the stuff we found was totally original, and people were correspondingly shocked by what they found. But now, and then I wrote these books and I thought, oh my God, what happens now? Because people will read the book and tell me what they read in the book. But it's still authentic up to this day because everybody finds their own story. Now you're asking how this comes about when it happens. So you take a session partner who has no call it, no big ideas about anything. He just has this thing of, I can't get out. So he tells you the various stories of his life. Some of them are cruel and disgusting. And then he comes to the end of that, and that takes about 2 or 3 hours. It doesn't take very long. And then he says, well, that's it, but I don't feel good about it. So you say, is there anything you didn't tell me yet? Because it doesn't seem to be part of it. And now he may say, well, I suddenly feel terribly cold, and I feel my neck is funny. I think we should take a break. I need to take a walk. So you say, knowing that he is, we call this dramatization, he is replaying something of his past and hasn't seen the image yet. So you would say, okay, now if you have your neck going like this, and if you feel cold, what sort of situation would a person have to be in to experience that sort of stuff? And then the client will go, ho, ho, he might sit in a cellar like in a dungeon, ho, ho. And he thinks that's very funny. And then he says, well, saying that, what do you actually see? Then it starts shaking, and then he gets into the thing, and he feels like that man back then who suffered to his death. And that re-experiencing comes gradually. It extends over a number of hours. It comes bit by bit, salami technique, so to speak. And you go through the same incident, perhaps 5, 10, 15 times, because with each time a new discovery, a new load of discharge comes through until it's emotionally clean and all the facts are clear. Meaning to say that people will get somatics and emotions even before they see the image, which proves that they don't fantasize.
Right.
You see what I mean?
I see what you mean. You were saying like this. So in your example, which I'm taking is loosely based on your real case experiences, they're physically shaking. They're physically going, yeah, haha, well, but I'm shaking. I had an experience of being taken up to heaven with a very spiritual lady, and it was an incredible experience, but I wasn't taking it seriously because I couldn't see anything. And then she said, oh, you're going into the light. And I'm thinking, yeah, whatever. And my body went, and I went, well, what? Why did my body do that? Because I'm feeling, I'm not feeling anything in particular. And then she took me and she said, okay, well, I'm going to bring you into the presence of God. And to cut a long story short, again, I had that breath. And I was like, whoa, this is very unusual. And then within a couple of minutes of getting near to God, I totally was, well, I wouldn't say I was sobbing. I was like a drain. I was crying like a drain. So something was going through my whole body, releasing on a very, very deep level. And I'm thinking, but I've done hypnosis. I've done NLP. Yeah. Well, we've been everywhere with that. What is going on here? It's obviously something different, and I need to reassess. And I was exhausted for 3 days after that experience. And that, okay, I understand that's not mind walking, but it says this is an experience where the body is giving us confirmation that something's going on. And you have your galvanic skin response, your GSR machine called the Mindwalker, which you've worked with somebody in England that you've made it.
The person who makes it in England is an old friend, and he put a new line in of machines, and he was nice enough to call them Mindwalker. So Mindwalker is his trade name, and Mindwalking is my trade name, and just coincided that he used that name for himself.
Okay, good. Okay, that clears that up.
What you've just said is a very good example of a grand release, which is felt as a discharge, coming up as tears and a shaking of the body.
Yeah.
And in Mindwalking, we have the same thing, except it would come sort of more gradual. The lady you're talking about pointed out something to you, and you were ready to go that way, or sort of jump in from the 5-meter jumping board, as it were. So you were lucky to have had that experience. It might have gone
absolutely.
It might have been uneventful, or it might have been too terrible. So it just worked for you. But essentially, it is that the re-experiencing of a past situation of, in that case, great freedom will evoke plenty of tears, because it involves loss. It means you aren't now as free as you were then. It reminds you of great times of the past or other levels of existence, and that releases a lot of grief charge. That's natural. So it is something very good happened for you there.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it happened in a very organic way. I was in Hong Kong, and I sat down on one day and I said, I'm doing all this energy work, but I feel I need to connect with spirit. Something's missing. I'm just working on a superficial level. And I said, thinking up for whatever reason, I said, I want to connect to spirit. I'm ready. And the next day I met this lady, and we arranged to meet, and we didn't meet. And then of course I bumped into her, and then I bumped into her again. And in Hong Kong, you don't bump into people. And I might bump into her again, like 2 weeks later. I'm like, okay. And then she sat down and she told me that when she was 24, she was an atheist, and she's on a ward in Hong Kong, not in Hong Kong, in New Zealand. And Mary appeared as a full apparition, and she could see her. She's an atheist, but she could see Mary. Nobody else could. And that was when a spiritual opening happened for her, and Mary became a teacher for her over a period of years, and she got introduced to other spiritual teachers. But there was no shamanic, she wasn't part of a shamanic family. She hadn't gone looking for it. It had just broken through into her daily life, which is, again, that's sort of one of the reasons that I wanted to start the podcast, is to say, these things actually, they do happen. You're not crazy. In fact, you might be just becoming a little bit more sane. But it's really crazy to think that they don't happen. That's the true craziness, in my opinion. Now,
I can confirm that. So many people have had experiences of that nature and never mentioned them to anyone, and don't know what they mean, but they feel there is a great big something somewhere that is worth exploring. And the moment, you see, as a Mindwalking session guide, you have had your own lot of sessions. So you're putting a very big space there. So the client can expand into this space very trustfully, and he will tell you things which he doesn't even tell himself usually. And most people have had spiritual experiences of significant importance to them, and on picking them up on that will take them quite a long way.
Well, I mean, I feel like we've really covered the I'd say the totally superficial surface of this up to now. And we've been talking for around 40 minutes, and I feel like before we dive into that whole next depth, we should perhaps just, in a way, we could make a summary of what we said, which is, I mean, I wouldn't know how to make a summary, but I would say, like, number one is there seems to be, your memory seems to almost be an access point when you've got particular traumatic things, and we can go into a whole level of what would I call it? I mean, what do you call that whole level that you can go through the? We got.
Okay, you know you're back.
That's amazing. That's only ever happened once before.
The moment you said, I'm going to make a summary, you started freezing.
Ah. Well, would you like to make a summary? I mean, what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to put a little trailer on the end of that and say, we just got cut off because we're actually at the end, and like it's almost like technology wanted to say, yeah, that's where we ended today. And that happened. So funny. I did an interview with Russell, and I don't know Russell before. I just seen him commenting on something in the remote viewing area, and we did this interview, and he started telling me things, and he starts talking about aliens. And the moment he talks about it, the TV in his place turns off, like it just sort of shuts down. My internet, and I'm in a guest house in the north of Thailand. The whole of the internet has completely shut down, and it was like, wow. And so it was a synchronized PK, what I would call a psychokinetic experience, that our electronics across different parts of the world were both shut down at exactly the same time. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I call psychokinetic. So so should we do a little break there and then
yeah, okay.
recording? All right, let me stop the recording now.